Good morning, everyone. It is morning on my side of the world. Thank you for joining this month. I know it is the summertime and people are with families on Fridays. A lot of companies are doing Fridays off. So if you're joining and you're still around, thanks for joining us on this live today. This episode is brought to you by NewGen Architects, a digital transformation consultant agency helping businesses navigate the complex world of operational technology and supply chain management. The NGA team of digital supply chain experts works with clients in all phases of the implementation lifecycle, from initial planning to post-implementation support. This includes tool selection like ERP and TMS, project and program management, and business transformation roadmaps. To learn how NGA can support your business scale, please visit newgenarchitects.com for more information and to schedule a free discovery session with a member of our team, which would probably be me. So if you want to talk to me about any of your digital transformation or modernization needs in the manufacturing and construction industries, definitely reach out. So today we are joined by a very special guest. We have a practitioner here. We're going to be talking about product development to actual production and getting it to the customer. So if we can bring up Emily to the virtual stage, then that would be great. So everyone, we have 4 action items / takeaways today that each have some of their, I would say, mini action items, or I guess like actual steps. And we have Emily. I hope it's okay if I call you an expert. I think that based off of your experience, and we were just talking pre-show, there's the world where many of us go through and we study supply chain management, or we study manufacturing operations or industrial engineering. And I remember having a course about total quality, and then I had a course about demand planning, and there were all of these different best practices, even when I did my certified supply chain professional certification. You go through and they ask you all these questions when you do the test. Well, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And then I very distinctly remember starting to work with clients, and I was like, but what is, I don't know. Is it me or is it them? And I remember when we spoke about you coming on the show, one thing that really, really stood out to me was, yes, if another consultant comes to me and tells me about S&OP, I'm going to lose my mind, because that's just not how it works. In the real world, when you are at a startup, when you're at a small business and you have to just get things done, it doesn't work in this week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4 executive S&OP meeting. That's just not how it works. So to give everyone a little bit of context before we get started, just not, I am Emily, this is what I do, but how did you get here? That's a better question. How did you get here to be SVP of product creation and manufacturing?
Sure. So I've been working for the past 15 years or so within the product space. My early career was spent in studio management. I then started working into product development that kind of rolled into production, and then broader supply chain operations. So it was an organic build over time, for sure. I've also worked across a number of product types: apparel, footwear, bags, accessories, hard and soft goods. So it's definitely been a journey and taken me some time. And in my current role of SVP, product creation and manufacturing at Nisolo, I oversee end-to-end supply chain. So everything from design, product development, sustainability, production, quality, and logistics. And I think the benefit of that is really being able to capitalize on the total momentum of the team and keep the total supply chain kind of working at the same pace. And generally, I would say my day is spent problem solving constantly. There's so much that comes up. Also focusing on relationship management and future planning as well.
Okay, so at the size of company that you guys are you a one-woman show? Do you have a team working with you?
Yes, I have a very, very talented team working with me, and we are also a global team. So we've got folks based in the US, across all of those verticals that I mentioned. And we also have folks at source as well, which is super, super helpful.
Okay. So do you like also sleep and eat in the meantime of doing all of the other stuff?
It really depends. It really depends what's going on, but yes.
So what would you say, excuse me, is I guess like high season for you guys or
You
peak season?
know, it's getting harder and harder to decipher that because more and more it feels like we are in a peak season from the supply chain side. I think the reason why is we are in high growth mode, and we have been since I started working at the business about 1.5 years ago, and they were even before that. So, to be very frank with you, again on the supply chain side, I have yet to really experience a lull in our momentum.
Right. Yes. It's very funny that you say that because I remember talking to just some career supply chain professionals. Maybe I think it's died down or I've stopped following it. But there was a time where the media, the headlines were always like another supply chain disruption, another supply chain disruption. And we were starting to say like, yes, guys, this is just how supply chain works. Like we don't have to keep talking about all of the disruptions. This is what we were doing before COVID. This is what we will continue to do post COVID.
Right.
It is just for a long time. And I have heard procurement people tell me, well, we went from 0 to 0 very quickly. But it's kind of a thankless job. So when things go right in the supply chain, they just go right.
Right.
And
Right.
no one says anything. It just goes. When things go wrong, it becomes what's going on with logistics? Why are things late? What happened to the production plan, et cetera, et cetera. So before I talk too much, let's get into some action items to keep us on track with the conversation. So when we're talking about the product development side, and there are a lot of times where when I'm talking to customers or when I'm talking to leadership and we're doing first initial discovery conversations, we have a graphic where we show this is what supply chain means. And I've been told by a CEO at a CPG company, I never looked at it this way. I now see all of the different pieces that it touches. And I think that one of the biggest things that people really don't realize, we have a little section called Innovate. And that's where you're just first thinking, we want to make this product. We want to introduce this new SKU. And a lot of times supply chain isn't really involved until it becomes, okay, we're ready to start producing this. And you have to start to think about the logistics and how are you going to transport it. And I remember working with a customer and one of their, they were a wine importer and distributor, one of their suppliers sent them the picture of a new bottle, and the director of logistics was looking at it. She said, I have no idea how I am going to package and distribute this to customers. Like, yes, it's a very fancy, pretty bottle, but like, I have no idea because it doesn't fit into like the traditional case boxing.
Right.
So we're going to be talking about the best practices to really be thinking about supply chain. One of the first things that we talked about was defining the partner selection process. So what does that look like when you say, hey, we're going to introduce a new bag, we're going to introduce a new pair of shoes? How do you decide who the partner is going to be to make that happen?
Sure. It's a very individual process. So I just want to firstly start with that. And ultimately, it needs to work for you. It needs to work for the company that you're representing as well. From my experience, there's a few helpful things to keep in mind. The first is really understanding what your non-negotiables are for the partner. So this may be on the compliance side, sustainability, perhaps transparent costing, communication requirements, and of course, making sure that they've got extensive experience making the product that you're procuring. I think starting with that is a really helpful and healthy framework to make sure that as you go through all of the conversations with the potential partner, and you start seeing physical product, you're keeping yourself in check, and you're also making sure that all of the businesses and your needs are being met. I also think managing timeline expectations is really crucial. So considering all aspects from what you need, when you need it, and comparing notes with your potential partner and how quickly they can execute versus your needs is very important. You might have a very limited window. I have frequently in this position where it's just, we need something and we need it within this time frame, and a partner can't manage that, or maybe they can even do it faster, and it buys you a little bit more time for other things within the process. And then lastly, cost structure as well. And this is really important because you don't want to go through your entire development process and ultimately get to the end and realize that you can't afford the product, or it's not in alignment with your expectations from a cost side. So certainly considering all aspects of sampling costs, how you're planning on procuring and purchasing the product. So, what are those terms, FOB, Ex Works, how are you planning on working? And payment terms are really important. I think once you have all of these things and in that partner identified, there are a number of different paths that you can take. And I think it's really important to recognize that things will go wrong. They always do, right? Like, we are in the business of working with people, and very often you're working globally as well. So there's a lot of kind of macro things that can be happening that are really unexpected. So always buffer extra time and definitely stay focused on what matters to your product and to that relationship with the partner.
So how many partner interviews, if there is a right answer? I know some procurement teams just like, it's the best of three and you go off the lowest cost. But you don't want to have too many because that extends the timeline, but you don't want to have too few and then not really have something to really compare. And then have you ever experienced, and this just came up because we're working with a real estate developer who is, trying to get into the productization and like manufacturing world of what modular construction looks like. And he told me, I have no idea how much I'm supposed to pay. I've gotten literally quotes from $4,000 to $100,000. I don't know. I don't know how much this is supposed to really cost. Have you ever experienced something like that? And, for a lot of people who could potentially be in the audience, just based off of the conversation that I know I have personally, these are CPG, like very much startup founders. Like I've been kind of doing this in my house, and now I'm growing out of my house. So I need more product, and now I need to go find someone that can make that happen. I don't know where to start. And I'm like, well, the supply chain is broad. That is not my expertise. I will connect you to someone who can likely help.
Right. It's a really interesting question. And I've never dealt with a delta that big from a cost perspective. Thankfully, knock on wood, not yet. But I will tell you that the process from my side in throughout my experience has really taught me that I need more options. And I need to be really super dialed into those non-negotiables. A lot of my non-negotiables are on the compliance side, sustainability side, corporate social responsibility. And the good thing is that in the process that I normally follow, that's part of those initial conversations, right? Going through, looking at any existing audits that the partner may have, running our own third-party audit, and then starting to discuss the outline of a contract, right? A master services agreement, to make sure that terms and conditions that we are looking for as a business match what the business is looking for, or we're able to find a path to get there. So I think the benefit of that is, if a partner is not going to work out for those non-negotiable reasons, we really know upfront, right? If that audit isn't passed, if there's no way through that, we identify that early on in our exploration.
Okay. And I want to go ahead and hop into the next action item because my question I think is going to take us there anyway.
Sure.
So it's communicating and knowing your USPs and your unique selling points. And you've mentioned sustainability a couple of times. I am a Nisolo customer, so
Great.
the brand resonates. Not only obviously like the shoes are cute and like the stuff
Right.
is cute, but I can get cute stuff from a lot of different places. So is sustainability, part of, or that's a silly question. I know that sustainability is part of the brand and part of the culture,
Sure.
but how do you really communicate that with your partners? It's more than just like, hey, we care about sustainability. You know what I mean? Like as you're
Right.
going through that, and you mentioned compliance and things like that, what are you really looking for? Because I know that there are, I mean, sustainability is a really big
It
topic
is.
right now in supply chain, from now a government mandate perspective in some regions, as well as just companies kind of finally realized. And I actually remember about 3 years ago, we were on a supply chain happy hour on a Saturday morning because that's what I used to do on Saturday mornings.
I love that. That's great.
And I remember someone was asking, how do I drive this conversation with leadership at my organization? And it seems like now it's just a thing.
And it's a big thing, right? It's a heavy word. It can mean so many different things to different people, from a brand perspective, let alone within the supply chain, right? Talking to suppliers about it, manufacturers about it. I like to decouple it and think about sustainability from a product perspective and responsibility from a manufacturer and corporate social responsibility perspective. Um, I think ultimately what's really important is that the factory or supplier that we're talking to truly understands our mission as a brand and understands what is a non-negotiable for us within our position. And there are several, right? And especially within the corporate social responsibility perspective, paying a living wage, for example, non-negotiable. If that's something that that potential partner does not do, it's not going to be the right match for us. If that's something that they're committed to getting to, that's great. We will happily educate them on what we expect, but we can't start that relationship until they're there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely tricky, I would say. It just requires time, though, and also education internally. So end to end within the supply chain team, everyone is aware of what we're looking for, so we can also keep an eye out if something does not seem right. And then on the sustainability side, product sustainability, we have great relationships with different tiers of suppliers. So again, just really making sure that suppliers at any level understand our brand, they understand our code of conduct, they understand how we measure things like emissions and things like that. And how much that matters to us, right? That we communicate that to our customer really helps their mindset align with ours and ultimately helps us create a better product.
Have you found that not that suppliers or partners have self-disqualified? I'm trying to think of the correct question. You have to ask the right answer or ask the right question to get the answer that you're looking for.
Right. Right.
So I guess has it been difficult to find suppliers? Like, do you spend more time saying, okay, yes, we're going to have to educate, or more time saying, okay, we have out of the 4 suppliers we need, these 3 are good to go, but we're going to have to spend some time working with this other one? What is the balance there?
I think that generally, we've been very lucky with the relationships that we have. A lot of the manufacturers that we've worked with for years are excellent and really committed to the same mission that we are. I think, we're going through such a significant period of growth, that we are frequently having conversations with additional partners too, to keep up with the capacity that we need. And I would say that generally, the will is there. There's a lot of really goodwill and excitement around the mission, but ultimately at times it can come down to paying the right amount of overtime, right? Or keeping overtime hours under a certain threshold. And some manufacturers can't do that, right? For other customers that they have. And we've maintained relationships with them, again, just to continue the conversation as they continue to grow. We see a ton of growth across all areas that we're manufacturing right now. But I think it's interesting how on board so many of the partners are that we've been speaking to, in terms of like alignment with the general philosophy.
That's great. It's really great to hear that, that you guys are focusing on that, because ultimately you are a customer, and whether it's in the B2B space or in the B2C space, there are more customers that are aware of these types of topics, and they do want to know that from their manufacturers. And there are a lot of times where we talk to, manufacturers, and we put it in the intangibles, KPI metrics. We have the margin, the cost of goods sold, and then we have a category for intangibles, and safety and sustainability is always in there. But even from a margin perspective, I remember when I learned about it, working under someone more senior and more experienced, and I thought, yes, that's obviously, that makes sense. But when you're running overtime so much, and you mentioned overtime, when you're running overtime so much, it's obviously a financial impact to your manufacturing business, right? But it also speaks to potentially a lack of process, that a lack of processes that are robust and standardized. It speaks to a lack of being able to plan properly. It speaks to a lack of potentially training, taking care of your employees. So it's not just, oh, we're spending a lot of money on overtime. It's really a symptom of some underlying problems that very negatively affect the manufacturing business. And to hear you say, as a customer, it could be a deal breaker for whether or not I'm going to do business with you. So it's just a little nugget that I think is very, like, look at your overtime, use overtime as a way to, start to diagnose some potential deeper issues and challenges that you might have within your manufacturing productions. Just good morning to everyone that is saying good morning to us. Venkat, Juan, Ebenezer, Douglas, Rob, Sarah, a LinkedIn user. Happy Friday, everyone, whoever you might be. Modu and Destin, thanks, guys, for joining. Of course, if you have questions for me, if you have questions for Emily, go ahead and drop it in the chat. I had another question. Timeline. You mentioned timeline and just having realistic expectations. I have two questions, actually. You're talking, what I hear is from a very experienced, potentially lessons learned, potentially right perspective, potentially like learn this on the job, don't do this.
Yeah.
But for companies that are, in the space of figuring out, how do I go about this process? It sounds like something where if you know that you do not have, if for whatever reason, anything I have just said was not, yes, absolutely. If anything was, oh, aha moment, you might need to bring in an expert, whether it's a consultant. I imagine that there are agencies that help just with, the product process.
Right.
So, do you recommend, or at what point do you recommend? I know it's very possible. The answer could be, it depends. Doing all of this in-house versus outsourcing it to someone whose core competency is just this piece of the puzzle.
Sure. It's a great question. And it can be a really complicated process, right? Because not only are you talking about onboarding a partner, you're talking about building that product and then commercializing the product for production and going through the logistics and fulfillment side of it too, right? And all of that can be very nuanced. There's certainly a way to do it, right? And I think it's important to lean into the process, not be afraid of it, and really feel like you can ask any question that you have to your partner, right? That's what builds a strong partnership, is that transparency, the communication, and really the foundational understanding between parties. However, if you have the opportunity to work with a consultant, I would recommend it. There are so many pitfalls that I certainly have fallen into. I continue to fall into too, because so much changes within that global landscape, that it just can help you save time and save money. You mentioned agents, also a great or a potential route to go, I should say, depending on what you're looking for. I think regardless of the route that you go, just making sure that those, again, just going back to those non-negotiables you may have, especially around communication, around transparency, really stay in check. And ultimately, if you are working with an agent or a consultant, you are really introducing another party to the relationship. So making sure that all parties know what communication flow you're expecting and the transparency that you, as ultimately the final customer, are expecting is really important.
And how long, my second question was, how long do you stay on site? When you go to visit partners and you're doing selection, how long do you stay on site? And then how often are you visiting? Do you guys have a standard for, across all manufacturing partners and suppliers, this is the way that we do it? Or, does it really depend and you do each one separately?
It really depends on what's happening in the business. I would love more standards generally than we have, but with the amount of, I don't want to say disruption, but the amount of change, let's say, that generally our partners are going through, that we're going through, it really has depended on the partner and the need. What we tend to do is start off with initial conversations with partners, just to make sure that we're speaking the same language, they understand what we're looking for from the partnership. Again, we'll then kind of launch into that audit and get the results of that audit typically before we visit. There are situations that will go before and after the audit, but I like to have the audit in hand because I like to talk through that in person. Typically, if there's anything that has to be implemented, we then move into more of the contracting process. We start talking about real physical product and details, all of that from that point. And that really warrants another visit. What we have found is that it saves a lot of time being on site. It is weeks worth of emails, worth of Zoom calls to just be there in person. Even if it is for 2 days, 3 days, to really get through some of the harder conversations and really make sure that both sides are understanding the intent of each other.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. All right. So time check. Let me get through these next couple. Things go wrong. And when you're creating your risk mitigation plan, what are a couple of things that just really stand out that you have learned these 3 things have to be in the risk mitigation plan, regardless of anything else? What are some things that you guys look at? And then I remember going back to like textbook versus what actually happens.
Yeah.
I remember like textbook, when you have a risk mitigation plan, you first start with everything that like, what do we have a risk tolerance for? What is going to be critical? What is a critical disruption to the business to where like, if this does not work, we cannot serve our customer. So this has to work. This is the thing that we stay on top of. Is creating a risk mitigation plan in real life with your suppliers like what we've learned in school, or do you throw out that book and you go with what works?
As much as I would like to say, keep the book.
Are we just actually throwing out all the books?
The books need to stay within your peripheral, maybe, but
maybe if you work at a car manufacturer, or if you actually work at Toyota, because
right.
Toyota is always that gold standard. Maybe if you work at Toyota, that works. Everyone else just throw out the book.
Yeah, I mean, listen, my background is in high growth startups, so I'm used to a lot of things going wrong, right? Or just going in another direction than anticipated, which is also part of the fun of it, right? Really finding a way through it and learning from that, rebuilding processes to make sure that you don't fall into that same kind of pitfall again. I think what I would really think about, you asked for three things that I have learned, and that frankly, even with the most careful planning can still go wrong. Firstly, it's timeliness, end-to-end timeliness, really honing that in with your potential partner, again, from sampling all the way through to shipment. What does that look like? And checking in on that timeline as you sample, as you get to PO placement, as you're in production, really dialing that in. And I think one of the surprises that could potentially come up is, you develop this great product. In your mind, your supplier has told you it's, 60 days for production, 90 days for production. You've got this all calendarized out. And it comes down to PO placement, and it's kind of a surprise because, oh no, we need longer because of the way we've made this product. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what? The whole time you've been operating, thinking that you can deliver it in on time or early, whatever, changing marketing plans because of it. And ultimately it can't happen. So I really would recommend keeping a tight watch on that calendarization process and keep it a part of all of your conversations with your partner. I think similarly, commercialization of product is really important. And what I mean by that is the transfer of that product from sampling into production. You can really develop super cool, really interesting product when you develop it, with a sampling room, with really great fabrics and really interesting finishes and all of this. And ultimately, it may not be viable for production. Right. And that is such a sobering reality sometimes. And again, that can come at a huge time cost if that's not considered, or if those questions aren't very directly asked during that sampling process. So just a huge heads up there. And finally, quality control is huge. And I think this can cause a big financial impact to your production if quality control and management is not laid out from the outset. So when thinking about quality control, again, this should be part of the plan from sampling, right? At what stages are you testing the product at a full finished product level or material level? And then equally, what does that process look like in production? The worst thing that you can do is develop this great, let's say, backpack, right? And you get into production, you're looking at the final goods, or, a quality control person is, and, the straps are cracking or breaking off. It's just such a shame. And you've got all of this production that's finished. So it's really important to think about that total process, because ultimately what I think we all want is on-time goods that are made to the agreed cost and able to ship in time for the launch or the replan that you're looking for.
And then to your point about the quality and driving that conversation home, is that you're shipping and that people like what they get. And then you're not getting a bunch of returns or exchanges because the quality of the product is not where you would expect it to be, nor where your customers expect it to be. And that stood out to me because I've seen that happen a lot as a customer, as well as working with other customers, where these startup brands that I like are growing. And being in supply chain, I can tell like things that stand out to me. And I'm sure this is not necessarily the naked eye of, a regular customer, but I can tell when they've switched logistics partner that maybe isn't thinking as much as they should be about the packaging and about the amount of packaging they use, about the visual aspect of the packaging and how, the customer is going to receive it. Or if I buy a food product that was really good before, and then now it's not really good, that's when I start thinking, oh, well, when the batch was smaller, it was easier to maintain the quality. Or did the manufacturer follow the recipe directly, because now this is not the product I'm used to getting. And then I'll go and I look at, customer reviews or other things, and I see the same thing. Like, it started off, all the stars were great, and then the stars slowly started to become 3.5. And I can always see, and I think, oh, what is this? Was there a breakdown in the quality process? And that's a big thing that I think some people don't really think about when they don't have the experience to know that I need to really stick close to this. Now that we're scaling, now that we're doing more, maybe I need to be visiting the supplier more often. I need to be in the manufacturing plant more often, and just make sure that the same quality product that we were providing at X units is continuing to be the quality of product we're providing at Y units and more.
Right. And I think, just as you were saying earlier, you were asking about if it's worth bringing in, a PD consultant or a product consultant to help folks go through this process. It's well worth thinking about that on the quality side as well. Wherever you're manufacturing, making sure that you have, and you can get, there's third-party quality agencies, there's freelancers, you can go about it in a really similar way as a product development expert, making sure that you've got someone there who's got eyes on your product throughout the whole process. It can't just be at the start of production. It can't just be in the middle. It can't just be at the end. It's really got to be overseeing that end to end to make sure that there's no corners that were cut. Also, that nothing is inadvertently going wrong. Mistakes happen, but ultimately you want to make sure you catch them, because it is very costly if those goods are shipped and they're not right.
Absolutely. And I follow a couple of startup product companies on LinkedIn. I follow their leaders, and a handful of them have taken the, I think, very courageous jump of doing their own manufacturing. And they want to manage that piece of the supply chain. And that was part of their risk management plan or risk mitigation plan. We will mitigate the risk of quality and, having to figure out and check in with our co-manufacturers and our suppliers all the time by just doing it ourselves in-house. And there is the saying of, and I don't know if it's a saying or if we just say it, but a short supply chain is a happy supply chain. And if you are doing the manufacturing, then that's less travel time. But there's also obviously a big consideration of being a manufacturer, and following different compliance rules and things like that. So have you had the experience of doing both, or mostly just working with partners and outsource?
Yes, I have. Nisolo owns our own factory in Peru. And, I think it's amazing. It's amazing to have that level of transparency and visibility and that closeness to your product. And at the same time, you really do face similar issues as if you were working with a contracted manufacturer, right? It's all about the strength of your team, that's there. And ultimately, our manufacturer is not within the US. It's not geographically close. So we still, work very, very closely with their teams, just as we do our contract manufacturers, on making sure that we've got the right reporting on quality, that they understand quality standards in the same way that we do. And ultimately just being very transparent with our customer feedback to make sure that we are constantly improving.
Mm-hmm. There are so many, I hear in this conversation, I've heard so many data points that have to be captured.
Yes.
and there are so many places that I've thought, oh, there's a software for that. Oh, there's a software for that. But I also am curious to know how much you guys have thought about leveraging, software, how much you leverage software versus, actually we've looked at a couple of different things, but we've got a pretty solid process and we haven't really needed to pursue getting some software to gather that data for us.
Yeah, our situation is more the latter. We are very clear across verticals the information that we need. So we know, for example, in production, we need a very clear production report. We need to make sure that production report is sent, on X cadence, and that is reviewed over a video call at least once a week with our partners, more in peak season. Same thing with quality, right? We require quality reports as we go throughout the production process, and ultimately these reports feed into each other. I think we do this manually right now. And I think one of the advantages of that is that it's easy for our partners, no matter where globally they are, to work into that. It's not complicated. There's no kind of additional onboarding that's needed, and we can still manipulate that data as we need to. Yes, in the future, systems will be great. But equally, we are still, a scrappy team. And growing very quickly. So it's not our top priority.
Absolutely. I talked to, maybe this was about a year ago. I talked to the CEO at a CPG company, and he said, I'll call you when I need supply chain 2.0. Right now we're fine. Yeah. and that's a totally valid answer. That's a totally valid perspective. And a customer that we're working with right now, they said, we want to be all digital. We want to do all the software, all the hardware. Like, this factory isn't where I want it to be until I walk in and I flip a button and everything just comes on. So I said, okay, well, you're going to have to hire this team and this team and this person and build this out and implement this. And there aren't really any softwares out there that's going to do exactly your process. So are you open to considering some sort of custom solution? And we had that call. We did 3 hours in 2 different 1.5 hour sessions. And at the end of the second call, he said, well, we met in between sessions and we decided that maybe some of the things I would like to do are not feasible right now.
It can be very expensive.
Yeah. and the juice isn't always worth the squeeze.
Right.
And that's why we always talk about level of effort versus level of impact. What are you putting into it? What are you going to get out of it? And what are your expectations? The ROI that you're expecting to get out of this, is it worth it? Right. And we did get a 5-minute warning. We're now at about a 2.5-minute warning. And the last action item, which I didn't leave a ton of time for just because we've already talked to it a lot, is to consider the sustainability and the circularity aspects of product development, which, as we mentioned, is not really, this topic that no one talks about. It's like, it's not the elephant in the room anymore. It's okay, we've got to figure this out. Right. So thinking about it way upstream is where you'll get a lot of value, as opposed to, and I don't want to say, this is probably going to, it sounds not so bad in my head, but I know how it's going to sound when it comes out. Like, going just for transportation and logistics is the lazy way. It's yeah, we're tracking our emissions. Yay. There's so many other factors upstream in the supply chain. Right. And it really comes in, you should be thinking about it when you're thinking about your product and when you're choosing partners from the beginning. And not everyone has the luxury of that. There are organizations that have been around for decades that are now getting on the bandwagon, and they're doing these audits that they've never done before. And that is, I imagine, a lot more cumbersome to try to change behaviors and change ways of working that you've been doing for 30 years to now say, hey, Mr. Supplier, Mrs. Supplier, this is the new compliance audit. You start that from the very beginning, which is what we've talked about.
Right. Absolutely right. Yeah, it's much more difficult to try and back into that and course correct it than it is to have that conversation up front and understand if you have alignment there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining, Emily, on this Friday morning. At the conclusion of the show, I have to read this thing. And that concludes today's show. Thank you for listening and supporting our show. If today's content resonates with you and you are seeking hands-on support to your business with supply chain management operations improvements, please visit nugentarchitects.com and schedule your free discovery session. If you want to be sure to never miss a show and catch recordings, be sure to sign up for the NGA newsletter at nugentarchitects.com or head over to letstalksupplychain.com where you can find all of the previous recordings. Thanks so much for joining, everyone, and have a great rest of your day heading into the weekend.